Welcome, my friend. The storm rages outside, but here, in the quiet of this story, I invite you to find peace. Let the sound of the rain and the distant thunder guide you as you drift into a place of calm. This story is my gift to you, a gentle companion for a night of restful sleep. Relax, let go of the day, and let the story carry you into dreams. The hum of the truck's engine was the only sound that accompanied David as he navigated the endless stretch of highway. He'd been driving for hours, the road twisting through desolate fields and dark forests, with nothing but the headlights illuminating the way ahead. The storm had rolled in from the west, the sky a thick blanket of black clouds that swallowed the stars. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees on either side of the road. But inside the truck, the cab was a world of its own, warm, isolated, the flickering radio barely audible over the engine's rumble. David had done this route hundreds of times, the long haul from the city to the small towns scattered along the country's edge. It wasn't a job for the faint of heart, but for David, it was second nature. He knew every mile, every curve, every patch of asphalt, like the back of his hand. And tonight was just another night, or so he thought. The rain started softly at first, but as the minutes passed, it grew heavier, slamming against the windshield in sheets. The wipers struggled to keep up, and the headlights began to blur the outlines of the trees. The road, everything beyond the truck becoming a haze of water and shadow. His hands gripped the wheel tighter as the road began to pitch downward into a long empty valley, the road stretching on as far as he could see. It was around this time, when the road seemed to go on forever, that David noticed something strange. A truck. It was far behind him at first, but it was there, just a pair of headlights in the distance, barely visible through the rain. He thought nothing of it at first. Another trucker on the same route, probably heading in the same direction. But then, as he passed the familiar landmarks, an old gas station, a rusted sign for a truck stop, the truck was still there, and it was getting closer. David squinted into the rearview mirror. The headlights from the other truck were now much brighter, closer. He could make out the faint shape of its grille and the outline of the cab. But no matter how much he accelerated, no matter how fast he pushed his rig, the other truck stayed the same distance behind him, never passing, never speeding up. It was just there, following. David's eyes narrowed. He could have sworn that the truck was too close now, too close for comfort. It was no longer just following him. It seemed to be matching his speed. He checked the rear view again, but now there was something different. The headlights weren't just headlights anymore. They were too bright, too piercing. They burned through the rain and darkness, like twin beacons that cut through the world around him. His heart started to race. He accelerated again, pushing the pedal harder, but the truck didn't slow down. It stayed there, a constant presence in his mirror. Something wasn't right. David's breath quickened as he gripped the wheel harder, fighting the instinct to look back again. He needed to focus on the road, but every time he glanced in the mirror, the truck was closer, its outline growing sharper and clearer. It was as if the darkness itself was being pulled toward him, drawn by the truck that should have been miles away by now. He glanced at the clock. It was nearly 3 a.m. He had a few more hours left to drive, but something told him this night wasn't going to be as easy as the others. He shook his head, trying to push the unease from his thoughts. It's just my mind playing tricks on me. Nothing to worry about. But even as he tried to convince himself, a strange feeling crawled up his spine, like something was watching him. The truck, whatever it was getting closer now, its headlights reflecting off the water-slicked road, distorting the world around him. His hands tightened on the wheel again. He wasn't sure what he was afraid of, but he was afraid. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the rain now pounding against the windshield in heavy sheets. the wind howling louder than before. And yet that truck, the one following him, the one that never seemed to pass, was still there. Behind him, just out of sight, moving with him, closer. David's grip on the steering wheel tightened as the sound of the rain grew louder, battering against the truck with a fierce intensity. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up, their motion growing slower as the rain fell in sheets, obscuring his view of the road. His eyes kept darting to the rear-view mirror, the presence of the truck behind him never wavering. It was as if it was always just there, always just behind him. He glanced at the clock. 3:30 a.m. The highway stretched on, endless, swallowed by the dark veil of the storm. There was nothing out here but the rain, the dark road, and that truck. It was too close now. The headlights were too bright, too blinding. It felt like they were pushing him forward, forcing him to go faster, though he couldn't quite explain why. He was going too fast, the tires struggling to grip the slick asphalt, but still the truck didn't budge. He tried to focus on the road ahead, tried to block out the unsettling presence behind him, but it was impossible. No matter how far he drove, no matter how fast he went, the truck was still there. He hadn't seen it pass. He hadn't seen it overtake him. The headlights loomed larger now, closer, brighter. His pulse quickened, his breath growing shallow as his eyes darted back to the rear-view mirror. And that's when he saw it. Just for a split second. The truck's outline wasn't quite right. The lights, they weren't just headlights. They were too bright, too unnatural. The shape of the truck itself seemed distorted, like something was wrong with it. Its form flickered, fading in and out of view as if the truck was shifting in and out of reality. David slammed his foot down on the accelerator, heart racing, desperate to put some distance between him and whatever that truck was. The engine roared, the truck surging forward into the storm. But even as he pushed harder on the gas pedal, the truck kept pace. It was right behind him, the headlights now a blinding glare that threatened to overwhelm him. He glanced back at the road, swerving slightly to avoid a pothole. But when he looked back at the mirror, it was gone. The truck was gone. It had vanished, disappeared into the rain-soaked darkness. David's heart pounded in his chest. He stared at the empty road behind him, eyes wide in disbelief. Where had it gone? How had it disappeared so quickly? It couldn't have just vanished. It had to be there. It had to be. And then, just as quickly as it had disappeared, the truck was back, in the mirror, closer than before. His breath caught in his throat as the lights burned into him, blinding, suffocating. He could feel the weight of the truck behind him, like it was pressing him forward, pushing him into the storm. His head spun as he fought the panic rising in his chest. This wasn't right. This wasn't just a regular truck. David's pulse quickened as the truck seemed to rush toward him, its headlights flickering like a dying star, still maintaining that unnerving, unnatural pace. His hands gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles white. His eyes scanned the road ahead again, desperate for any sign of a break in the monotony. The same stretch of wet asphalt, the same darkness, the same rain. But then ahead, just beyond the glow of the headlights, he saw something, a road sign. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. It read, "Welcome to Sleepy Hollow. Last exit before the forest." Sleepy Hollow. That couldn't be right. He'd never seen that sign before, and he'd driven this route countless times. His mind raced. Where was he? He didn't remember seeing that exit on the map. The sign seemed to glow in the headlights, too bright, almost too welcoming. Its letters too clear, too crisp in the otherwise impenetrable darkness. His foot hovered over the brake, but his eyes snapped back to the rear-view mirror. The truck was still there, closer now, and as he glanced at the sign again, he felt a chill crawl up his spine. Something about this place, about this stretch of road, was wrong. He was being pulled somewhere. He couldn't explain it, but he could feel it deep in his gut. The truck was still there, its headlights now filling the mirror completely, casting eerie, elongated shadows on the road in front of him. And as the truck seemed to get even closer, David noticed something that made his blood run cold. The figure inside. He saw it clearly now. Not just the truck. There was a face. The driver. or what was left of it, was staring directly at him. The face was pale, drawn and hollow, with eyes that were too wide, too empty, glowing faintly in the dark. It didn't blink. It didn't look away. It just stared. David's breath caught in his throat. What the hell is that? Before he could process what he was seeing, the truck surged forward, coming even closer. And then, the lights flashed, blinding, overpowering, and in the instant before the light consumed him completely, David heard it, a low guttural sound, a whisper, breaking through the roar of the engine and the thunder outside. You're too late. David's hands were slick with sweat now, his grip on the steering wheel firm, but shaky as his eyes flicked from the road to the rearview mirror and back again. The storm outside was no longer just a backdrop to his journey, it was a living, breathing entity. The rain battered the truck in waves, the wind howling so fiercely it felt like the road itself was being torn apart. But the worst part, the truck behind him was still there. It wasn't just following anymore. The headlights burned brighter, almost unnaturally bright. Too bright. David could no longer see the road ahead without squinting, the light from the other truck cutting through the downpour like twin searchlights. The truck's presence loomed over him like a shadow, casting everything else into the background, rendering him helpless. He glanced at the clock. 4 a.m. The truck had been there for over an hour, and still it stayed behind him. No matter how fast he drove, no matter how many times he changed lanes, the truck followed at the exact same speed. But it didn't feel like it was just behind him. It felt like it was closing in. David's pulse quickened. His mind raced. What was going on? He'd been on this highway dozens of times, but tonight was different. This wasn't just another lonely stretch of road. No, there was something wrong with this place. Something off. Something alive about it. And that truck, whatever it was the key. He checked the mirrors again. The truck was closer. Far too close. David slammed on the brakes. The truck didn't react. Instead, the headlights seemed to intensify, as if the other driver was forcing him to keep moving, pushing him forward like a predator chasing its prey. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to stop, to pull over and make sense of what was happening. But the pull of the truck's presence was stronger than any fear he had ever known. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the wheel. He couldn't explain it. He could hear the rain outside, the crash of the thunder, the rumble of the wind. But beneath it all, something more insidious was at play. The truck had stopped mimicking him. It wasn't just following anymore. It was controlling the pace, pulling him along. David's breath was shallow, his mind spinning. What did it want? Why was it there? He had never seen anything like it. The truck, the driver, none of it made sense. He needed to get away, but no matter how much he pushed on the gas, the truck was always there, breathing down his neck, its headlights inching closer and closer. That's when he noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. The truck hadn't just followed him. It had started to change. The outline of the vehicle seemed to shift, becoming hazy, like a mirage on the horizon, bending and warping as though it were flickering in and out of existence. David's stomach dropped. His headlights reflected off the truck's front bumper. But in the mirror they weren't just shining brightly. They were refracting, bending at unnatural angles, as if they were being warped by something else. Then it happened. The entire truck vanished, completely. David's eyes widened in panic. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the wet road. His truck jerked forward, but there was no sign of the truck behind him. He turned his head quickly to look out the side window, scanning the road to the rear. The highway stretched on empty, but he saw nothing. The truck had completely disappeared. For a moment, David almost believed he had imagined the whole thing. The truck, the headlights, the strange distortion. But then, just as quickly as it had vanished, the figure reappeared, right in front of him. The truck was no longer behind him. It was in front of him. Its headlights were blinding, cutting through the night like a hot knife through butter. But this time it wasn't just a silhouette in the distance. The truck was right there, blocking his way, its grille so close he could see the rusted edges, the decayed chrome, the outline of the cab that seemed to flicker in and out of focus. David's breath caught in his throat. He swerved to the side, the tires screeching against the asphalt, but there was no escape. The road was narrow, no room to go around. He hit the brakes, but the truck moved with him, staying right in his path, never losing pace. David slammed on the horn, desperate, but the sound of his truck's blaring horn only made the presence of the other truck more suffocating, more real. The headlights flared even brighter, blinding him completely. And that's when it spoke, not through the radio, not through the CB, but through the air vibrating through his skull, its voice low, guttural, like it was coming from the very road beneath him. That's it, you're not going anywhere. David's breath caught in his throat. The voice was close now, the sound so deep, so terrifying, that it reverberated in his bones. He couldn't think, he couldn't move. You've already passed the point of no return. And with that the truck surged forward. The headlights engulfed everything in front of him. The world stopped. The truck's headlights burned through the darkness like twin suns. David's eyes were squeezed shut, trying to shield himself from the blinding light. But it didn't matter. The light seeped through his eyelids, consuming him, dragging him into its glow, pulling him deeper into the storm. The truck had moved ahead of him, but the headlights kept coming, right at him no matter which way he swerved. The engine roared, the tires skidding on the wet road, but it was useless. No matter what he did, he couldn't escape it. The storm had turned the highway into a twisted maze, and every time David tried to veer off, to turn down a side road, to speed up, the truck matched him, staying right there, in front of him, blocking every exit, every escape. You can't run from me. The voice boomed through the cab, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't just coming from the radio, it was coming from the very air around him. The voice was inside his head, echoing through his skull, vibrating with a power he couldn't understand. David's chest tightened as he gasped for air, the fear suffocating him, his mind spiraling. His heart raced faster, harder, like it was trying to escape his body. He could feel the sweat running down his face, his hands slipping on the steering wheel as the truck in front of him surged forward, its headlights a blinding force that made everything else fade into darkness. He turned the wheel sharply, swerving to the right, desperate to break free from the truck's grasp. For a moment he thought he might make it. He thought the truck was finally gone. But then just as quickly as the road had opened up, it closed again. The headlights shifted. The truck was behind him now, closer than ever. I told you. The voice growled again, the words low, predatory. You can't escape. David's breath came in ragged gasps, his mind racing, the terror building with every passing second. He wasn't sure if it was the storm, or if the truck was controlling the storm now. But the rain had picked up again, harder, faster. The wind howled louder, and the very trees on the side of the road seemed to bend and lean toward him, like they were being sucked into the storm. The truck didn't stop. It kept gaining on him, getting closer and closer with every passing second, until David couldn't see anything but the blinding lights. It was as if he was driving straight into an abyss, the road vanishing under his tires, his mind disintegrating into nothingness. And then a sharp crack. The truck's lights flared, brighter than they had ever been before, until they engulfed everything. The storm, the road, the trees, all of it was consumed in the light. It was like the entire world was on fire. David slammed his foot on the brakes, but it was too late. The truck was right there, right in front of him. He had no choice. He slammed into the brakes, the tires screaming in protest, but the truck didn't stop. The lights flashed once more, and then, the truck was gone. The world went dark. The sound of the storm ceased, the wind stopping as if the very air had been sucked out of the universe. The headlights disappeared, leaving David in complete suffocating blackness. For a moment, David sat there, his hands trembling, unable to move, his breath slow and shallow. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with a strange heaviness. The road in front of him was empty, still, silent, but something was wrong. David slowly turned the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the road, the forest, the empty highway. There was nothing in front of him, no truck, no lights, just an eerie silence that pressed down on him like a weight. But then in the distance, a figure, a silhouette, standing in the middle of the road. David's heart skipped a beat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, blocking his path. And as the headlights flickered, David saw it clearly. It wasn't a person. It was the truck driver. But it wasn't just any truck driver. This figure was tall, emaciated, its face gaunt and pale, its eyes wide and unblinking, glowing faintly like the headlights of the truck that had chased it. The figure's clothes were ragged, torn as if they had been weathered by time. Its hand stretched out, reaching for it. "You are mine now," the figure said, its voice a rasp, echoing in David's ears, twisting in his mind. "You can never leave." David slammed his foot down on the gas. The truck surged forward, but the figure didn't move. It didn't flinch. It just stood there, waiting, watching. And as David approached the figure, he felt it. The pull, the inescapable force that tugged him toward the figure, toward the truck, toward the endless highway. The darkness, the storm, the truck. It was all part of the same thing. It had been waiting for him. He had been waiting for him. And then, with a final screech of tires, David collided with the figure. The world went black. The road was empty. The storm had passed. The rain was gone. There was no sign of David's truck, no sign of the ghost truck, no sign of anything. The highway was silent, still, and somewhere, deep in the heart of the forest, another truck began its endless drive, searching for its next victim. The silence was absolute. David's truck sat motionless in the middle of the road, the headlights dimming, the engine sputtering, and then falling silent. There was no sign of the phantom truck, no shadowy figure in the distance, no storm, just the empty highway stretching out in front of him, shrouded in the eerie quiet that had settled after the chaos. The truck driver, or whatever that figure had been, was gone. But it didn't feel like an escape. No, it felt like an unfinished chapter, like something had been left undone. David's hands were still gripping the steering wheel, but his body was frozen. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. It was as if the air around him had thickened, weighed down by the very essence of the nightmare he'd just witnessed. "It's over." The words escaped his lips before he could stop them. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to the darkness or to himself. It didn't matter. He didn't believe it. He didn't believe it was over. Not really. The storm, the truck, the man, they had all left their mark on him deep within his soul. And no matter how far he drove, no matter how fast he went, he would never be able to outrun it. His eyes flicked back to the empty road, but this time there was no sign of the phantom truck, no headlights in the distance, no shadowy figure standing in his way. For the first time the road was quiet, silent, but even in that silence, the feeling lingered. The road was still alive, alive with the memories of those who had driven it before him. David turned the ignition key, his fingers trembling. The truck's engine hummed back to life, but something felt wrong. The engine's purr didn't sound quite the same. It was softer, almost too smooth. He adjusted his rear-view mirror, expecting to see the usual sight, the empty highway stretching behind him, the reflection of the world that was still moving forward. But when he looked, the rear-view mirror was different. The reflection wasn't just of his own truck. It was a reflection of the highway behind him, stretching back, miles upon miles. And there, at the edge of his mirror, he saw it. The truck. It was back. The headlights, brighter than before, cutting through the darkness like a blinding force, drawing closer and closer. The road behind him hadn't changed, but the truck, it was right there, in his mirror, in his reflection, drawing nearer with every second. It had never left. It had just been waiting. David's heart pounded in his chest. He slammed on the brakes, but the truck didn't slow down. It didn't stop. It was moving faster now, closing in on him, its headlights burning through the mirror. The voice, the same voice, deep and guttural, reached him through the air, through the mirror, through his soul. "You can't escape. You belong to the road now." David's breath caught in his throat. He could feel it now. The cold, the pull, the suffocating weight of the truck, and the figure that followed. It was real. It had always been real. The road wasn't just a road. It was a place where lost souls traveled, where truck drivers became part of the highway, part of the never-ending cycle. The truck, it wasn't a truck. It was a trap. And once you entered, you could never leave. The reflection in the rear-view mirror didn't change. The truck was still there, still coming closer, and there was no escaping it. David slammed the truck into drive, speeding forward, but it didn't matter. The road was endless. The truck was always behind him, always following. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, The figure vanished from the mirror. The road was silent again. The truck had disappeared, but the dread remained, an unshakable presence that filled the cab with a quiet, suffocating terror. David turned his eyes forward, staring at the empty road ahead. But even as he looked, he knew the storm might have passed, but the truck, the figure, the endless highway, it would never leave him. He was already part of it. And no matter how far he drove, no matter where he went, the road would always be waiting for him. Somewhere out there, another trucker would make his way down that very road, unaware of the horror waiting for him. The highway, the ghost truck, the driver, they would always be there, always lurking in the shadows of the road, drawing in the next unsuspecting soul. And when the storm came again, the ghost truck would rise from the dark, looking for the next truck driver to add to its collection.